Hello, I'm the Pink Phantom, and this is my podcast. Join me as I delve into the world of games and gaming, and especially old school RPGs. Together, let's voyage into the astral realm and check out my Phantom thoughts. So, a little state of the podcast up front here. I'm trying to adapt a more standardized sort of format of delivering content just for my own organization as much for anything else. So the way things will work going forward is at the front of the podcast, I'll have anything like this where I'm talking about just the process of the podcast in general, usually something real short, hopefully. Then I'll go to any kind of events or products that have caught my attention the last week. Not anything in depth, but just things I want to mention that caught my attention that I want to bring to the attention of anybody listening. Then I'll do a segment of feedback, any kind of call-ins, if people send emails, things like that, and respond to those. Then any kind of sort of more in-depth topic or question or thought process that I want to go into. And then at the end, more stuff from the world of the tales of the Dragon Slayers, because I'm really enjoying that, and that's probably going to be a part of the podcast going forward. I don't know how many people will be interested in that. It'll be sort of almost game reports, I guess, for lack of a better term, talking about what's been going on with these adventurers, and then also occasionally talking about mechanics I've had to learn or process or alter or come up with to deal with situations in a solo play of a game that originally AD&D was designed really to be played with people, other people. And then any kind of world building will be mixed into. It'll probably be, I don't know that those will have a set order, or if even all the parts will be there. And all these different segments may not be in every podcast, but that's the way I'm going to put it together from this point on. So let's get on with the podcast, because I do have all of that. I do have some products I want to mention up front. I do have some feedback that's come in. I do have a topic to cover, and I do have some things from Tales of the Dragon Slayers. So let's get to it. The thing I want to talk off right off the bat relates to a Kickstarter that I backed 10 years ago. There was a project called Dice Cards, and these were sort of exactly what says on the tin. It was playing cards, and up in the corner it had your standard suit and value. And then it had a picture of just like a lot of dice and other decision-making randomizers in different orientations and different results and different things like that, with the idea that you draw a card, and whatever game you're playing or whatever decision you have to make, there's something on there to help you adjudicate a random effect. And if it's not on that specific card, you flip another card, because everything wasn't on every card. But you're talking about, I don't know if it was 20 or 25 or 30 or more different randomizers pictured on each of these cards, but there were a bunch of them. Some of the things on the list: playing cards, polyhedral dice, fudge dice, distribution dice, elements die, weather die, treasure map, compass, poker chips, craps die, a dreidel, dominoes, letter tiles, Zinner cards, the little ESPN cards where you hold one up and try to get somebody to read your mind what's on there, tarot, runes, fortune cookie, dungeon tile, coin, and just lots of things. And so I backed it and I bought it. And I think I also bought another deck later when he said we still got decks for sale. It is for sale. These are for sale on Dice Cards, drivethroughcards.com. There will be a link to that page in the show notes, but you can also go on Drive-Through Cards and just type in Dice Cards, all one word, and it should come up. And the name of this gentleman is, if I have the page up, is Ian Millington. And he just sent out through Kickstarter, through that project, another little communication with all his backers, No, it's not for another Kickstarter. It's for something that he was thinking about kickstarting, but it's really just a game he's giving away now. Uh, it's an improv storytelling tabletop role playing, creative writing without writing cooperative 1+ player game, and it's called What, but it's spelled HWAET. And don't worry about that spelling because the link to the actual document is going to be in the show notes. But this is a game he's putting out. He's putting out for free. It's like it's listed as release 0.1, that sort of thing. And it's an interesting game. It has some very basic mechanics. There's a timer aspect to it. The website actually does have a button on it when you go to that first page where you can pick the 7 to 10 minute timer or the 3 to 5 minute timer, depending on if you're working with a group or solo. If you want to use just an on-screen reminder of where you are with the time. It's some very interesting mechanics with it. I'm sure they've been done in some games before. I've seen a lot of cooperative storytelling games. One that jumps to mind is Microscope and Kingdom by the same guy that wrote Microscope, and I think he actually has a Kickstarter going now. But in this game, What, there's some very interesting prompts, and if that's the kind of thing you like, something to get your mind rolling on a situation or trying to build a game world or build a scenario or just tell a story, I think this is something worth checking out. That's why I wanted to include the link. I will warn you, when you get to the link, there is a button in the middle that says request for comment. This is the button to press to download the PDF. It's not that clear, and one of the backers wrote that back in as a comment. But the reason it's on there is because at the end of the document for this game, he does request, he puts in an email address and does request that if people play it, to drop him a line to what you thought about it, and did you enjoy it? Did you like it? Did you find it useful? What did you like about it? What didn't you like about it? Because he's interested if people are interested beyond just it's something that he has enjoyed creating and wants to share with the world. It's shared via Creative Commons 4.0 share alike license, so you can distribute it freely. You can use it whatever you want to do with it. I'm sorry, that's Creative Commons attribution license. So as long as you include, this was created by Ian Millington, just you can distribute it freely. So it's something he just wanted to give out to the game world, something that he found interesting, and given the sort of the interest over the years in things like Microscope and Kingdom and other games that promote just sort of sitting down and doing world building as a group, doing storytelling as a group, and just having a structure for it, I thought that was something to put out there and to give this guy some feedback. And I know that a lot of the people that listen to this game are people into role playing, into world building, into that kind of creative idea, and using that to feed into their gaming. So I wanted to definitely put that out there as soon as possible. And as I said, all the links are in the show notes. Drive-through cards, dice cards on there, and What, spelled, and I clicked away from the document. That's not good. HWAET. And the website, if you're just looking to jot it down, it's HWAET.OOJITS.com. That's HWAET.OOJITS.com. Whatujits.com. What a great name for a website, even if it is hard to spell just listening to it said. So definitely check that out, please.
Hey, Pink Phantom, Jason here. Enjoyed your latest episode. Yeah, I really love the process of going through and doing the decision-making process. What are we going to do? How are we going to handle this? Very, very cool. Um, and you need to do all that before that gold dragon comes back. And because gold dragon's a polymorph, it already could be back. So, yeah, interesting times for the party. Looking forward to seeing how this works out.
Thank you for the call, Jason. Yeah, you'll be pleased to know there is more indeed at the end of this podcast. More Tales of the Dragon Slayers, so you'll be happy about that. And yeah, I enjoy tinkering with mechanics, especially when there's not anything official that applies to a situation. Not that I'm against with tinkering with official mechanics, because it's the nature of the game to find what works for you. And there are some situations that will be coming up in the future that I'm going to have to figure out how to do a solo play thing, and really just figuring out where you're mixing the player and dungeon master roles, how to adjudicate some things. So it's going to be interesting going forward. I'm really enjoying the 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 exercise of the mind, the theater of the mind exercise, and there will be more in the future.
Pink Phantom, it's Evil Jeff. Hey, just started listening to your podcast. Try to go through everything first out of the back catalog before I comment on stuff. But I got to number 9, where you're going over system mastery versus player skill versus metagaming in response to a podcast that Taylor did over at Cleric Square Ringmail, now Whispering GM podcast, and he had Rick Stump on. And you agree with most everything except for more or less the definition of metagaming, where you thought the line was. And I listened to what you said, and I thought about it, and I feel that it really comes down to where you're at. Were you at the table? If you were in that position, what would you do? It really does feel a lot like, metagaming is in the eye of the beholder. While you had a very good definition there, I like that. What was the intent? I could see where Rick could say, being at that table, that might have been their intent. Well, not exactly truly intent, but the idea is the same there. So I think it's really a fine line between that system mastery and metagaming. And as GMs and as players, we kind of have to know where that is and talk about it, make sure that we're doing everything quite right. All right, I'm going to keep going on with your podcast. Appreciate what you've done so far. Later.
Thanks for the call, Evil Jeff, and thank you for listening to the podcast. I hope you continue to enjoy it. For the people who either haven't listened to that episode, or who, when they listened to that episode, it was a while ago, because it was last fall, I believe, when that episode went out. As of this podcast, a quick overview of my stated sort of definitions. A player skill is the player expressing their character's knowledge of the game world and using it to influence their decision, make effective decisions within that game world. Whereas I had metagaming as them using outside the game world knowledge that they as players have about either the game world, because they've read a module or they've read a monster manual, or their knowledge of mechanics, to make and influence the actions of the characters within the game world, something the characters would not know. And a third thing that I talked about in that podcast, system mastery, was really sort of jumping back and forth, the ability of the player to jump back and forth between the game system, knowing the game system well enough to know how that translates into the game world, so that they can use that game world knowledge, that player skill, more effectively, just in the way the game parts interact, to show what's going on in that world. And the discussion in question was the story that Rick Stump told about a group of his players fighting bugbears. They were down to one bugbear. A magic user was about to cast magic missile on it, and one of the other players told them not to use magic missile, to throw a dart, because they knew how many hit dice the bugbear had, knew it was down to its last few hit points, which is expressing game knowledge within the world context. And so Rick Stump said he believed that was, in his opinion, metagaming. And my take was that the player may have used game mechanic language to express the information, but since the players have been fighting the bugbears, they already knew how tough bugbears were. They would know what a bugbear down to almost its last breath would look like. And so they were actually communicating in-game, in-character knowledge to another character. Just the way they expressed it sounded like a more metagaming way. What I didn't make clear in that particular podcast was that, because I wanted to differentiate between the two views, was that I talked about intent, and that what I didn't express very well in that podcast was that Rick Stump would probably know intent of the people he played with far better than I would. And so his viewpoint in that specific context was probably more valid than mine, because I was giving my opinion based on an anecdote being told on another podcast in a situation that I wasn't involved in. So I didn't mean in any way, shape, or form to say I know better than Rick Stump, but I was, thinking more about the definitions and stuff and not the way I was expressing it. But you're right, Evil Jeff. It is a matter of perspective, and certainly his perspective would be probably closer to the reality of the situation than mine would for that particular anecdote, because he was there and he knew those people and I don't. And I think we discussed it. I think you'll see we discussed it in later episodes in some of the call-ins I got about that episode, about how it is table dependent and even game system dependent, because there are game systems that have metagaming built in. They have some sort of meta currency like bennies that players can accumulate through play, and they can then spend to utilize game mechanics again, to do a reroll or to get a bonus. And so that, what is metagaming and what isn't metagaming is going to depend not just from group to group, but from system to system. But it was a great discussion, and I thank you for participating in it, and I look forward to hearing more from you, I hope. By the way, Evil Jeff has a podcast himself, Minions and Musings. You can find it on Spotify for podcasters and a lot of other podcatchers across the interwebs. And I do have a link to the Spotify podcasters site in the show notes. And that call from either Jeff by Evil Jeff about a podcast and a topic from months ago actually dovetails nicely into something I wanted to talk about in this podcast. Earlier this week, or it may have been the very end of last week, things sort of run together after a few days. I saw on Twitter a post by an old school oriented player, someone that I know is an old school oriented player, stating that player agency was the term player agency was the RPG equivalent of the word moist, and then showing a picture of a hand about to run fingernails down a chalkboard, which of course, made me chuckle, because a lot of people don't like the word moist, and people definitely don't like fingernails down a chalkboard. For those of you old enough to remember what a chalkboard is and what fingernails going down it sounds like. But it got me to thinking about, I've seen this sort of discussion before about player agency, and I see a lot of it in the more indie RPG world, the newer versions of Dungeons and Dragons world, talking about player agency as a really positive thing, about players having the influence over the game, and about the inclusion in indie games of player-facing mechanics to encourage and to build a game around player agency. And then there's a portion of old school Twitter that kind of harumps and rolls their eyes about, player agency like it's some kind of, I don't know, some kind of a negative. But from my perspective, player agency is a very old school concept, because one of the things that old school style gamers generally, it's almost universal, people who play the old school style games, is they can't stand railroading. Or sometimes the way they put the terminology is the DM is writing a novel, and the players are just there experiencing it through their characters. because you're on rails, the DM is driving the story, and there's not a lot of meaningful choices to be made. Player agency is the opposite. Players are making are expected to be able to make meaningful choices. And player agency has a bigger meaning than that, in that a lot of these games that are designed around the concept of player agency are giving a lot of the in-game decision making and in-game mechanic execution to the players instead of the DM. You don't have the DM rolling dice behind the DM screen, in front of the DM screen, or even at all. In a lot of cases, in some of these player agency oriented games, you have everything is kind of has a challenge rating. The monsters may not even roll dice if there is a conflict to adjudicate combat or what have you. The players do. They do the die rolling. All the dice rolls are in the open. The players are driving the story. The players are definitely in control, and the DM is just kind of responding to the players' play to set up the situation for the players to make the next decision. So there is more to it than just not railroading. But I think they are, if not on parallel tracks, then on, occupying the same track and then leaving a little bit and coming back, the two sides, where you have the players being given the authority to drive the situation, just like in a lot of old school games explain it as a sandbox, where the players are going to make the decision. They're going to decide where the campaign goes, how play adjudicates, and the DM is simply going to interpret their actions in context of the game world, and the game mechanics are generally all in the open, and there's not much hidden other than this is what player characters don't know, and this is what player characters do know, which is how I think it relates to things like player skills, system mastery, and metagaming, which is why I thought it was a good call from Evil Jeff. But yes, player agency is actually old school. That's the opinion I'm putting forth here. Do you have an opinion on that? Let me know. All the links are in the show notes, and I go over them at the very end of the episode. And thanks again to Evil Jeff. And now another entry in the Tales of the Dragon Slayers. On their first return journey from the keep, Sir Gus, Quinn, and John and James, a couple of valets, encountered a war party of 130 dwarves, led by King Smoit and his chief lieutenant Rune, and sons Idelig, Prediri, and Doli. They halted the party suspiciously and asked their business in the foothills beneath the realm of the dwarves. When Sir Gus stated their quest to end the danger of the dragon, Rune admitted that it was their aim as well. When Sir Gus sought to assuage their suspicions by informing them the dragon was dead, the dwarves murmured, and Idelig, the eldest son, openly scoffed at such an accomplishment. Sir Gus leveled his gaze at the dwarf, declaring that he had lost 2 companions to the creature, and nearly 2 others as well, and would not have their sacrifices besmirched. King Smoit intervened that no slight was intended, but the claim was understandably difficult to believe, even seeing the state of Sir Gus's armor. The dragon had ravaged the land for 60 days, to such an extent that his kingdom had sent much of its strength to end the beast. Sir Gus recognized the sense of it, and told the king they had but to follow and see for themselves. Idelig immediately objected. They cannot be trusted, father, as many dwarves assented vocally. To which Sir Gus responded, on the honor of the crest I bear, it is so. Will you doubt my honor and the bravery of my companions? When Idelig responded, yes, Sir Gus turned to King Smoit. I consider this a personal challenge. If I meet it, will you accompany us? Gauging the rest of his kin, he nodded. This will not be to the death, stated the king. Sir Gus nodded, as did Idelig. Do not bother, said Idelig, as Sir Gus sought to dismount. You will be off that horse soon enough. and he moved to an open area, brandishing his spear, as the dwarves formed a large semicircle near the wagon. A duel of honor between Sir Gus and Prince Adelaide. In the first round, Sir Gus is charging, so the initiative goes to the player with the longest weapon. That is Sir Gus with his lance. He is +2 to hit because he's charging, +1 because his lance is a weapon of choice, +4 for armor adjustment, weapon versus armor adjustment, and +3 because of his strength, for a grand total of a +10 to this attack. He needs a 19 or better to hit. And with the 10 plus his bonus, he connects. He's going to do double damage with his lance, which will be 3 to 9. He scores a total of 7 plus 6 for his strength. For 13 damage, 1 point of that is absorbed by the field plate of the prince. Now the prince gets his roll. He has a set spear, so he could do 2 times the damage as well with this strike. He is +3 because he has double specialization in the spear, but he is at -2 because of the weapon versus armor adjustment, for a total bonus of +1. He needs a 19 or better to hit. And with an 18, he connects with a 19. And his damage is a total of 4. A total of 5. He rolled a 1 and he had +3 because of his double weapon specialization. Sir Gus's armor absorbs 1 of that, and so he takes 4 points of damage. Round 2, initiative. Sir Gus, a 6. The prince, a 4. Sir Gus takes another swing with his spear. He is not charging this time, so he will only be at a +8. With a 17, he connects for another total of 3 plus 6, 9. 1 point is absorbed by the prince's armor. Prince rolls again. Again, he is at a +1, needing a 19. And he gets an 8. He swings and misses. Round 3. Sir Gus, a 3. The prince, a 5. The prince gets first strike. And with a 15, with his bonus, a 16, he will not hit. Sir Gus, with a +8, rolls a 12, so he hits again. 4, 3, 4, 5 points of damage. 5 plus 6, 11 points of damage. 1 point absorbed by the armor. Fourth round. Sir Gus, a 1. The prince, a 6. Prince gets another roll. With a roll of a 4, he is not going to hit. Sir Gus, he rolls an 8. With his bonus, that's a 16. He misses. Round 5. Sir Gus, a 5. The prince, a 3. Sir Gus rolls again. With a 12, he hits again. He's going to have 6 points of damage from his bonus. And he rolls another 9 on the dice for a total of 15. 1 absorbed by the armor. Field plate armor. And the prince is down. And Sir Gus has won this fight. Sir Gus had proved the mightier opponent. After the prince had fallen, he dropped his lance, dismounted, and produced a water skin to offer to his battered opponent. His stunned foe accepted the drink, pausing as he recovered his senses, then renewing his drinking with a nod. Sir Gus heartily patted him on the shoulder with a well fought, and then withdrew as two dwarves came to help the prince to his feet. "We will accompany you," stated the king. When they arrived, the dwarven host gathered awestruck around the falling dragon carcass. Sir Gus introduced the king and his retainers to the rest of the group. They all shared a hearty meal. The party recounted the battle and their decision to move the treasure. The king asked to see it, and his eyes widened at the sight. "I can see why," he said. "You have no need to fear us. You have done this land a great boon. We will keep your secret. I see you have harvested scales and hide from the dragon. When you have secured your prize, bring some of the scales to us. We will forge an armor no other can match." The party offered the king and his sons coins or gems to seal the friendship. Each took one, searching seemingly for the cheapest. "Less likely to be stolen," Smoit stated, "and still a strong symbol of friendship." He then handed them 2 parchments, a map to our stronghold and many of the surrounding lands, and a letter that commemorates our bond. The next morning, the dwarves set off home. So what you just heard was the first random encounter of the Dragon Slayers in this world. The first time rolling up something and getting a result. And the process of doing that, I just would like to go over briefly because it's a little different from. I'm going to follow probably the process in the book most of the time, where if they're in the wilderness, you roll at certain times depending on the type of terrain you're in. You roll certain times a day, and on a 1 out of 10, you're going to get a random encounter. But before I even started doing that, I took a look at the world and I said, look, this dragon's been new to the area. It's been on a rampage. So anything involving random encounters, it's going to be very unlikely for a little while. Because obviously the dragon's wrath has driven out all the sentient species, the humans, the demi-humans, things like that, driven them to hiding. And of course, any kind of animals would have been driven just from the fear effect, would have been driven out. And I got to thinking of, okay, well, how long would it take for them to be back? And what would be going on? Would there be any kind of random encounter? So my thought process on this was, first of all, there would probably be still maybe some more adventuring parties out there trying to take care of the dragon. And so I tried to figure out what happened before, and that's a whole thing I won't go into right now, but I figured there'd be a handful of parties out there, and I rolled to see how many, so that I would know if I rolled a bunch of random encounters, when would I just essentially run out of people that are out there with the dragon still flying around, or at least they think it's flying around. I said, let's roll a d8. And I rolled a d8, I came up with 2. So I said, if any of the random encounters come up demi-humans or humans, then, or adventuring parties, that's what it's going to be. It's going to be one of those groups, not necessarily an adventuring party, of course. And amazingly, the first time I rolled up a random encounter, it came up as demi-humans. And then rolling on the encounter table, it was dwarves. So I came up with dwarves. And it's kind of a good thing that Sir Gus has such a high charisma, because his reaction made all the difference, because the reaction dice were terrible. If he hadn't had any kind of bonus or a very low bonus, the dwarves would have attacked on sight, and there were 130 of them. So that would have been that for that part of the group. And then we had to figure out where to go from there. So a little luck there, and then Sir Gus got some good rolls in the combat, and here we are. We're got a group of potential friends and allies in the area. So that was exciting. And it will be interesting to see what random encounters come up in the future, because the other part of the process was, when do people and creatures start filtering back in? I started thinking about what happened during when there were all the lockdowns during the pandemic. And I remembered that we started getting a lot of stories about wildlife just showing up in places where wildlife hadn't been in forever. Large towns, small cities, places where you just didn't see wildlife out in the open anymore. And I looked back, and it looked like it took about a month or so for wildlife to start filtering back in. And I think that a dragon rampaging around the land kind of fits into that humanity building a city or a large busy town somewhere, and how it drives the wildlife out. So the way I figured it is, regular intelligent creatures would come back in after about 2 weeks, but that the wildlife portion of any random encounters wouldn't come in for about a month. And so if we roll up anything random encounters, it says it's something that's more of a wildlife type of creature, that this just won't occur. So there's less chance of random encounters. And I've actually rolled through random encounters for several days, and so the dice actually have been not rolling that many random encounters during the sort of pause period where there's not as much opportunity around. So even just the opportunity to roll on the table to see what kind of creatures come up in the random encounter hasn't come up. So it's like the dice are kind of agreeing with me. So I found that interesting. But that's just a little vignette there of what's been going on. Hope to have much more of that in the future. I've been really trying to organize things so I can organize my thoughts, organize the campaign, and give me a better opportunity to present it to people to enjoy. So I hope people are enjoying it out there. If you are, let me know. All the contact information is in the show notes, and you'll hear it right now at the end of the podcast. Thanks for listening. And that's it for this episode of Phantom Thoughts. I love feedback. If you would like to comment, there's lots of different ways for you to do it. First, you can go to podcasters.spotify.com/pod/show/Phantom Thoughts and leave a voice message. Or you can send an email or attach a voice message to an email and send it to phantomthoughtspodcast@gmail.com. You can call into my Google Voice line at 864-209-1441. You can send me a message on SpeakPipe at www.speakpipe.com/Phantom Thoughts. You can also contact me on Discord. I am the Pink Phantom, number 9782. So please let me hear from you. Thank you for listening, and have a good day. Links to contact information and topics covered in this podcast can be found in the show notes. The opening music for this episode was Strength of the Titans, and the closing music is Late Night Radio, both by Kevin MacLeod at Incompetech.com, licensed under Creative Commons by Attribution 4.0 license. Goodbye.